Catharine MacKinnon's Toward a Feminist Theory of the State is one of the most critical works in feminist legal theory, providing a radical critique of how the state operates not as a neutral entity, but as an enforcer of patriarchal power. MacKinnon challenges traditional legal and political theories that claim the state acts impartially. Instead, she argues that the state is an active participant in perpetuating gender inequality through its legal, political, and economic systems. This essay delves deeper into MacKinnon's analysis, offering a more detailed examination of how the state functions as an instrument of male power, using real-world examples to illustrate the theory's relevance and application. The myth of legal neutrality, reinforcing male interests. A central premise in MacKinnon's critique is the myth of legal neutrality. In theory, the law treats all individuals equally, applying the same standards and principles regardless of their identity. However, MacKinnon argues that this neutrality is illusory, as the legal system is deeply embedded in a patriarchal society that benefits men. The very construction of the law reflects male experiences and interests, rendering it inherently biased in favour of men. A striking example of this is the historical treatment of marital rape in many legal systems. For centuries, the law treated rape within marriage as an impossibility, based on the notion that a wife, by virtue of her marriage, had given irrevocable consent to sexual intercourse with her husband. This legal principle, rooted in the doctrine of coverture, assumed that women's bodies were the property of their husbands. Marital rape was not criminalized in many countries until the late 20th century, demonstrating how legal systems codified male control over women's bodies. In the United States, marital rape was not criminalized nationwide until 1993, a shockingly late development that exemplifies how the law has historically reinforced male dominance. Prior to this, many states maintained laws that implicitly condoned sexual violence within marriage. This legal framework prioritized male sexual entitlement over women's bodily autonomy, showcasing the state's complicity in enforcing patriarchal norms. The issue of sexual harassment is another example of how legal neutrality conceals male power. Before MacKinnon's work, sexual harassment in the workplace was often dismissed as trivial or personal, not a matter for legal concern. MacKinnon's groundbreaking legal theory established that sexual harassment is a form of gender discrimination, significantly influencing Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 in the US. However, even with legal advances, workplace harassment laws continue to struggle with enforcement and bias. Women, particularly women of colour, often face barriers in proving their claims, as legal standards and social norms are still informed by male perspectives. These examples reveal that the concept of legal neutrality is not neutral at all. Instead, the law functions as an extension of male power, regulating society in ways that favour men's interests while masking this bias under the guise of fairness. The regulation of sexuality, state control over women's bodies. MacKinnon places significant emphasis on the state's role in regulating sexuality as a key way in which it enforces male dominance. She argues that laws surrounding sexuality are not neutral, but are deeply rooted in patriarchal ideals that prioritize male control over women's bodies. The state regulates women's sexuality in ways that ensure they remain subordinated, often punishing women who deviate from traditional gender norms. Marriage laws have historically been central to this regulation. Under coverture, a legal doctrine widely used in the 19th century, women's legal identities were subsumed under their husbands upon marriage. Women had no legal rights to own property, enter into contracts, or make decisions independently of their husbands. Although coverture has been formally abolished, many of its assumptions continue to inform modern marriage laws. For example, women are often still expected to take on the bulk of caregiving and domestic responsibilities, reinforcing their economic dependence on men. Even today, laws regarding marriage reflect patriarchal control. In many countries, same-sex marriage was only legalized after intense legal and social battles. Laws that restricted marriage to heterosexual couples were not just about preserving tradition, but also about controlling sexual norms and maintaining a male-dominated family structure. By regulating who can marry and under what circumstances, the state has historically ensured that women's sexuality remained tied to patriarchal norms. Moreover, the regulation of reproductive rights is another critical example of how the state exercises control over women's bodies. The criminalization of abortion, restrictive laws regarding contraception, and limited access to reproductive health care all serve to limit women's autonomy. MacKinnon argues that these laws are not just about preserving life or protecting morality, they are about ensuring that women remain subservient to the roles of wife and mother with limited choices over their reproductive futures. The infamous case of Roe v. Wade in the United States, which legalized abortion in 1973, illustrates the ongoing battle over reproductive rights. Despite the landmark decision, states have continued to pass restrictive abortion laws, making it difficult or impossible for women in certain regions to access safe abortion services. In 2022, the U.S. Supreme Court's decision in Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health Organization overturned Roe, effectively rolling back the legal protections that had been in place for nearly 50 years. The decision has since allowed states to enforce abortion bans or severe restrictions, limiting women's reproductive freedom and reinforcing male control over their bodies. This is not just a legal issue, but a profound social control mechanism that keeps women economically and socially dependent on men. Economic policies, the undervaluation of women's labour. MacKinnon's critique of the state also extends to its economic policies, which she argues are designed to reinforce male dominance by devaluing women's labour. The economic system, like the legal system, is structured in ways that prioritise male interests, particularly through the gendered division of labour and the undervaluation of work typically performed by women. A significant example of this is the persistent gender wage gap, where women, on average, earn less than men for the same work. According to data from the US Census Bureau, women earn approximately 82 cents for every dollar earned by men. However, this gap is even wider for women of colour. For example, Black women in the US earn about 63 cents, and Latina women earn about 55 cents for every dollar earned by white, non-Hispanic men. This wage disparity reflects how the economic system, influenced by patriarchal values, systematically undervalues women's contributions to the workforce. The undervaluation of caregiving and domestic labour is another glaring example of how economic policies reinforce gender inequality. Traditionally, caregiving has been seen as women's work and is often unpaid or underpaid. Even when performed in a professional capacity, such as nursing, teaching, or domestic work, caregiving labour is significantly undercompensated compared to male-dominated fields. This devaluation of caregiving is not a coincidence, but a reflection of the patriarchal belief that women's primary role is in the home, supporting men. In many countries, there are few or no policies to support working parents, such as affordable childcare or paid parental leave. As a result, women are often forced to choose between advancing in their careers or fulfilling caregiving responsibilities. In many cases, they end up taking on a second shift of unpaid domestic labour after their paid work, limiting their economic opportunities and reinforcing their dependence on male partners. Countries like Sweden and Norway, which offer extensive parental leave policies and publicly funded childcare, demonstrate how state intervention can lessen gender disparities. However, even in these relatively progressive nations, women still face significant challenges in achieving economic equality. MacKinnon would argue that as long as the state is fundamentally organised around male interests, even progressive reforms will be limited in their effectiveness. Political representation and male power. MacKinnon extends her critique of the state to its political institutions, highlighting how the exclusion of women from political power reinforces male dominance. Despite gains in women's political representation over the last few decades, the structures and norms of political institutions remain male-dominated, ensuring that patriarchal power is preserved. The underrepresentation of women in politics is a global phenomenon. In the United States, women make up roughly 28% of Congress, despite constituting more than half of the population. This underrepresentation ensures that political decisions continue to reflect male perspectives, particularly on issues related to gender equality. Even in countries with higher levels of female representation, such as Norway and Sweden, political power remains concentrated in the hands of men, especially in key leadership positions. MacKinnon also notes that when women do enter politics, they are often expected to conform to the existing structures, which were built by and for men. Political institutions are steeped in norms of masculinity, where traits like assertiveness, competitiveness, and aggression are valued, while traits traditionally associated with femininity, such as cooperation or empathy, are marginalized. Women in politics are often subject to heightened scrutiny and criticism, particularly when they challenge patriarchal norms or advocate for feminist policies. The impact of this exclusion is significant. Issues that disproportionately affect women, such as sexual violence, reproductive rights, and gender-based economic inequality, are often sidelined or addressed inadequately. When these issues are discussed, they are frequently framed in ways that align with male perspectives or economic interests. For example, discussions about the gender pay gap often focus on individual choice or merit, ignoring the structural barriers that women face. Likewise, debates about reproductive rights are frequently framed in terms of morality or fetal rights, rather than centering on women's autonomy and bodily integrity. Even when women are in positions of political power, they often face barriers to enacting meaningful change. In many cases, male-dominated institutions resist feminist perspectives or prioritize other issues deemed more important to the broader population, which is largely shaped by male interests. This resistance underscores how deeply entrenched patriarchal power is within political institutions. The state's complicity in violence against women. One of the most damning aspects of MacKinnon's critique of the state is its complicity in perpetuating violence against women. She argues that violence is a central mechanism through which men exert control over women, and the state, through its legal and political systems, often enables or condones this violence. This is evident in the way the state handles domestic violence, sexual assault, and harassment, as well as the broader social structures that normalize violence against women. Historically, the legal system has treated domestic violence as a private matter, outside the scope of state intervention. Police and courts were often reluctant to intervene in cases of domestic abuse, viewing them as personal disputes rather than serious crimes. Even today, domestic violence is frequently underreported and underprosecuted, with many victims facing significant barriers to accessing justice. In some cases, law enforcement agencies have actively discouraged women from reporting abuse, reflecting the broader societal belief that men have a right to control their partners. The criminal justice system's handling of sexual assault cases is another glaring example of the state's failure to protect women. In many countries, the legal standards for proving rape or sexual assault are so high that the vast majority of cases never result in convictions. For instance, in the United States, it is estimated that only 25 out of every 1,000 rapes reported to police result in a felony conviction. This is not just a failure of individual cases, but reflects a broader societal bias that mistrusts women's testimony and minimizes the harm of sexual violence. In addition to its failure to adequately address gender-based violence, the state also perpetuates violence against women through its broader social policies. For example, in many countries, austerity measures and cuts to social services disproportionately impact women, particularly those who are economically disadvantaged. By reducing access to healthcare, housing, and social support, the state exacerbates the conditions that make women vulnerable to violence and exploitation. Conclusion. Catharine MacKinnon's book, Toward a Feminist Theory of the State, offers a radical critique of how the state functions as an instrument of male power. Through its legal, political, and economic systems, the state reinforces and perpetuates gender inequality, ensuring that male dominance remains intact. By exposing the state's role in maintaining patriarchy, MacKinnon challenges feminists to rethink their relationship with legal and political institutions and to develop new strategies for achieving gender equality. For MacKinnon, the state must be fundamentally transformed if it is to serve the interests of all citizens, regardless of gender. This transformation requires more than just legal reforms or increased representation for women in politics. It requires a deeper rethinking of the structures and norms that underpin the state, and a commitment to dismantling the systems of power that have historically benefited men at the expense of women. The struggle for gender equality, according to MacKinnon, is not just a battle for individual rights or representation. It is a broader struggle to challenge the very foundations of the state and its role in perpetuating male dominance. Only by confronting and dismantling these structures can we begin to build a more just and equitable society for all.